There we go then. It is April 7th of the 2023 year of our Lord, whoever that Lord might be. Actually, in Buddhist years, it's, I have the calendar over there. Anyway, it's more than that. It's more than 2023. It's like 25, 26, something. So I should start using that. That'd be good. Really confuse people. The future people that watch these videos that I'm want to communicate to the future. Okay, then. Yeah, well, that we could do a long editorial segment, but I don't think people came here for the editorial segments. So we're going to meditate for 20 minutes and then why predict what's going to happen? Just I think we're going to meditate for 20 minutes. And so, and I have a plan, but, don't know mind is a good thing to stick with. All right. So settling back into your meditation posture, whatever that might be, whatever works for you. And you can close your eyes or just lower your gaze. Stepping out of the visual world into the inner world. And just starting by feeling how you're holding your body. Having a sense of settling, calming, relaxing, but relaxing with clarity, with alertness. And starting to feel the breath moving in the body, breathing in and breathing out. You can feel the breath at the nostrils or the belly, or just feel the body moving with the breath. There are different ways of working with mindfulness of breathing. We can try to solely focus on the breath, try to have a one-pointed attention. We can have a more open awareness that includes the whole of the body, other perceptions, particularly sounds. It's more of a spacious awareness that just highlights the breath. It's worth experimenting to try different approaches to see what suits your abilities and your tendencies. There are kind of strengths or, particular benefits, as well as risks or weaknesses of any strategy. Well, the one-pointed strategy can develop concentration strongly. It also risks kind of opening what Analio calls a kind of back door to our awareness, where become unaware of the slippage. Can also be repressive or aversive, trying to control the mind. More open awareness can have the positive side, the feeling of this being a little more at ease, a little more natural. But it can slip into spacing out as the spacious mind becomes spacey mind. Our attempt not to repress becomes laziness. So there is no one technique guaranteed to work under all circumstances for all people. We have to take responsibility for our own practice. We may find that different approaches or different aspects of approaches work at different times. This then requires even more intention and intuition in each moment to skillfully navigate the challenges of being mindful. Whatever approach we take to our practice, the mind seems to wander at times, sometimes persistently. And so negotiating and working with the wandering mind is a key element of our practice. The most basic strategy is to return to the breath when we see the mind has wandered. Say, reliable and simple approach. You can also expand this approach by taking a moment to notice what thought we've been thinking, to give a little look inside the mind, inside our thought processes, before returning to the breath. This can be very revealing. We might start to see patterns of thought or even kind of absurdities that pass through the mind. This then helps us to change our relationship to thoughts, to perhaps not take them as seriously or as personally, but just to see them as content, just appearing in the mind and disappearing. Not me, not mine, not I. Whatever our approach, to always remember we have the breath as our refuge, as our home, as our friend to ground us in the present moment. All right. Well, we've finished a second book. There's very little to mark time on Zoom, you know. Just kind of open up your computer and there's a bunch of people there and they just keep showing up. The squares are filled and there you go. But the two books that we've explored over the last 3 years are one way of marking the passage of time. I'll note that when I don't have my cap on, which I often do because of the chilliness in this house, I have this also mark of time, the leftover remnants of surgery for skin cancer that I had in the fall. So I was reading a New Yorker article about a new book about Preston Sturgis, the writer, director, screwball comedy director from the 40s. And he apparently was writing a memoir before he died called The Events Leading Up to My Death, which I thought that's a perfect name for a memoir, The Events Leading Up to My Death. Yeah, these are all the things that happened but they led. Anyway, thought that was funny. But you know me, full of humor. So there were questions about if I was going to go into another one of my books. And as my mind went out and scanned the possibilities, it didn't feel itself drawn to anything. There was no magnetic force. You know, it's a little strange, like, okay, I'll pull out this book I wrote like 10 years ago. And, you know, it's sort of like sometimes I don't feel sort of as connected maybe to them. So for tonight, and we shall see if this continues, I have chosen to read you from my work in progress, which I hope some people will find interesting. Others might find it frustrating because you can't read along and you can't buy a copy. And I don't know if this will ever be published. So there's that too. But this is, you know, where my mind is focused right now. So it seems like for me, at least, it's something that feels alive. And so I hope you won't mind if I at least do that tonight, and we'll see, maybe for a while. It is already book length, so we could spend another year or so on this. And so to introduce you to this, the working title is, I should go to the top and double check. Yes, Wrestling with the Buddha, Reflections on the Anapanasati Sutta. And so instead of explaining anything about it, I will just read. This is what is identified as the introduction. And to realize that what you're hearing now, if it ever is published, will be different, presumably, and there will probably be a preface. So here we are. The Anapanasati Sutta, the Discourse on Mindfulness of Breathing, Majjhima Nikaya 118, is one of the most elegant teachings in early Buddhism. Its meditation instructions are both poetic and practical. Their logic draws us in and leads us inexorably to awakening. One feels the skilled, compassionate, and wise hand of the Buddha guiding you forward. Its form is simple, its teachings profound, and its challenges daunting. Thich Nhat Hanh says that when he discovered the sutta, he thought he'd, quote, discovered the greatest treasure in the world, unquote. The sutta contains 4 main sections. Some people would say 5. I may have to change that. One laying out the setting in which it was given, A second considered the heart of the sutta, giving the meditation instructions, and two more detailing the fruits of the practice. The role of the sutta in Theravada Buddhism has fluctuated over time, sometimes given prominence, sometimes submerged beneath more popular commentarial texts. In recent decades, a revival of interest has grown for the teachings. What makes the sutta so appealing is that, as suggested in the title, it promises to give us guidance on the most fundamental tool in Buddhist meditation, mindful breathing. For me, what makes it even more interesting is that once engaged in a serious way, that promise becomes a challenge. What at first seems straightforward and transparent becomes, in application, something of a puzzle. Finally, what makes the sutta so durable is that on the one hand, it describes a step-by-step process for attaining enlightenment, the highest goal of Buddhist practice, and at the same time can be utilized for much less ambitious spiritual, psychological, and meditative purposes. Wherever you are on the Buddhist or simply the mindfulness path, you can learn something valuable from this sutta. And it can open doors in your practice that will take you as deep as you want to go. I was inspired to write about the sutta when sitting a self-retreat in December of 2021. There, I worked with a short chapter from Ajahn Pasano's book, Nourishing the Roots, called Mindfulness of Breathing, Food for the Heart. This clear and succinct encapsulation of the sutta was a valuable guide for a week of meditation. After deciding that I wanted to take on the challenge of writing about the sutta, I quickly realized that I needed more guidance. Thus, I began to study 3 other books: Mindfulness of Breathing by Bhikkhu Analayo, Mindfulness with Breathing by Buddhadasa Bhikkhu, and Breathe, You Are Alive by Thich Nhat Hanh. I also listened to and took extensive notes on the recordings of Bhikkhu Bodhi's talks on the sutta. My primary source for a translation of the sutta is Bhikkhu Bodhi, though at times I use parts of other translators' versions. Thereby, the book became a kind of conversation with 3 authors, teachers. Actually 4, I think, maybe 5, anyway. At times, I have felt a great longing to ask various questions of them questions. And fortunately, Ajahn Pasano has been available for such inquiries. Bhikkhu Bodhi also responded generously to one of my questions. It's not enough, though, to write a book about what other people say about the Anapanasati Sutta. Rather, I am bringing my own experience and, as the title suggests, challenges in working with the sutta and further with meditation and Buddhism in general to this undertaking. In some ways, I feel I've dug deeper into my meditative experience in this book than any of my previous ones. I wanted to expose the myriad nuances, confusions, and excursions of my practice over more than 40 years. I don't do that as some sort of meditation memoir, an awful thought, but because I believe, as one sutta puts it, we are different in body, but one in mind. I don't think that my experiences are unique. I believe they are some of the things that happen to people when they try to meditate. And my experience as a meditation teacher tells me that a lot of meditators need to hear that they too are not unique. We call this normalizing, helping people to stop thinking there is something wrong with them or that they are personally flawed in some way by showing them that their experiences are actually quite common, normal. I suppose there are also times when I feel alone in my struggles, don't we all? And writing about them feels like a way of not being so alone. As you'll learn as you read this book, I'm a depressive. I'm incredibly fortunate that I've been able to manage this challenge to the point that it doesn't destructively impact my life anymore. But at times when I've heard some upbeat Dharma talk or cheery meditation instructions, I've felt like a loser, someone who doesn't fit into a spiritual community that sometimes feels too much like a cheerleading camp. I mean, the Buddha's teaching is about suffering and how to end it, so shouldn't we be addressing the first part of that proposition, not just the second? And note bene, please note, some Buddhists will object to my characterizing myself as a depressive on the grounds that any label is reifying a self. To be clear, I use that language in the relative sense, not as a definition. It would be more accurate to say that over this lifetime, certain depressive mind states have been prevalent, but such language becomes ponderous over the course of a book. Therefore, I hope you will understand that anytime I say that I, quote, am, unquote, something, it is meant in this sense as patterns that manifest rather than a solid self that with certain definitive qualities. So that is so far the introduction. I see that I use the word challenge too often, so thank you for letting me read that, because I will know that I need to go back and replace that word here and there with some other word. We have more time. I'll give you a little bit more. Just, because this is what we're doing. So this is part one, the setting. Most of the books, talks, and commentaries on the Anapanasati Sutta focus on the 16 steps that describe mindfulness of breathing. In fact, when I was first exposed to the sutta, I was surprised to find there were other parts. The opening, what I call the setting, can read like a superfluous embellishment meant for scholars and monks, but I see it differently. In these tidbits found throughout the suttas, we learn the details of the Buddha's world, the places he taught, the people who were his followers and antagonists, and some of the events that inspired particular teachings. In this way, these ancient, sometimes dusty suttas come alive, become more real, more immediate, and more human. These aren't mythic tales, but the surviving details of a remarkable human being's life. I like to put myself there, probably way in the back row, among these devoted followers listening to the Dharma conveyed by my master. The sutta begins with a traditional opening, "Thus have I heard." This is said to be the voice of Ananda, the Buddha's attendant for the last 25 years of his life. Ananda is known as the person who recited the Buddha's teachings at the first council 3 months after the death of the Buddha, his parinibbana, or final and complete enlightenment. As in many suttas, Ananda tells us where the discourse was given and who was there. Here, the Buddha was at Savatthi in the Eastern Park in the, quote, palace of Megara's mother. Right away, I'm thinking, who's Megara? And doesn't his mother have a name? Although the sutta doesn't tell us. The book Great Disciples of the Buddha, edited by Bhikkhu Bodhi, fills us in. Oddly enough, the person referred to, Visakha, a great lay follower of the Buddha, was actually Megara's daughter-in-law. But because she converted him, Megara, to Buddhism, she was known as his mother. I suppose we'd say she was his spiritual mother. To me, that's like one of those just weird anecdotes that I had to write about. Many of the Buddhist suttas were delivered instead from Jeta's Grove, Anapanasati Park, which was also in Savatthi. Bhikkhu Bodhi suggests that it might have been on the other side of town, the west side. By now, the Buddha had been teaching for many years. To have 2 monasteries in one city is pretty impressive. There for his teaching are many of his senior disciples, a hall of fame that includes Sariputta, Mahamoggallana, Anuruddha, Ananda, and others. Great Disciples of the Buddha fleshes out their histories, and there we learn many fascinating details of their lives. The sutta now tells us that the elder monks have been teaching the newer ones. Great Disciples of the Buddha tells us that each of these elders had a kind of specialty, whether in concentration, wisdom, loving kindness, or something else that they would teach. What's interesting here is that we realize that the Buddha himself isn't doing that much hands-on teaching at this point. There are so many monks around him, hundreds it seems, that he has to farm out that task to his enlightened followers. So right away, we're getting a look into the world of the Buddha's followers. After decades of teaching, he must have become so popular that it was relatively difficult to get close to him. That being said, many suttas are addressed to a particular person, monk or lay person, so he wasn't actually inaccessible. little bit more. Now the Buddha tells the assembled group that he is so happy with the progress of all these monks that he's going to teach for another month. What we're learning is that this is the end of the traditional 3-month rains retreat, and the Buddha has decided to add a 4th month. This is big news because during the rains retreat, the monks were required to stay in one place. And now, as word goes out that the Buddha is going to be teaching for another month, other monks start streaming in from outlying areas where they had been holed up. They're all excited because they hadn't been able to see the Buddha during the retreat, and now they'll get their chance. In announcing that he's staying for the extra time, we're told he's going to wait through the Kamudi full moon. Bhikkhu Bodhi's notes in this sutta tell us that that full moon is so named because a certain water lily with a similar name blossoms at that time. This is one of those irrelevant details that somehow moves me. First, because I'm imagining this beautiful flower blooming, but also because it's so specific. These are the types of details that convey authenticity to these texts, turn them from vague generalities into real events we can imagine happening in this distant past. The importance of the teaching that is going to follow is signaled when the Buddha says, quote, "So arouse still more energy to attain the unattained, to the unachieved, to realize the unrealized," unquote. What he's saying is that a lot of you are getting close to enlightenment, and I'm going to give you a teaching that will help you take that last big step. Just hang out for another month and see if you can make it. He didn't actually say any of this. It's just what I infer from the text. Another subtext here is that the Buddha can read people's minds. I mean, maybe he's just getting a report from the teachers who are working with all these monks. But given what we're told about the Buddha's psychic powers, it seems likely that he was tuning in to the progress of his followers. I want to see if I can get to this end of this section. Maybe. I don't want to go on too long and bore you guys. Now we come to the night that these teachings were offered. Here we learn that the Blessed One was seated in the open, surrounded by the Sangha of bhikkhus. Again, I'm inspired by imagining this gathering on a cool Indian night. However, in terms of this sutta being an accurate description of events, we have to wonder how everyone would have been able to hear the teachings. Without a microphone or jumbotron to project his voice and image, the Buddha would have had to shout to be heard by what seems to be hundreds of monks. Not very contemplative for a Dharma talk. A simple fact like this reminds us not to take the suttas too literally. At times we hear about royal visitors who arrive with 500 elephants, for example. We're given to understand that numbers like this are just meant to convey a lot rather than an actual number. So presumably there were quite a few monks around, and it was not so many that they couldn't hear from the cheap seats. You might ask, am I trying to have it both ways, talking about the events described in the sutta as actual historical happenings, then turning around and saying it's not all literal? And you would be right. The truth is, I'm not depending on the historical accuracy of the suttas to make my points. I suspect that the description of events in the suttas have some basis in history and also diverge from reality. What's really important is the teachings and guidance the Buddha gives and his reflections on the human condition. The settings and characters just bring it all more alive. They aren't necessary for you to know in order to learn from and benefit from what he taught. I suppose that's why people skip over the introduction to this sutta. I just have a fondness for narrative elements and like to dig around in them for clues or pointers. Now the Buddha proceeds with praising the Sangha who are present. Here are a few things we learn. This group is, quote, free from prattle. They aren't wasting time in gossip. Quote, it consists purely of heartwood, the best part of a tree, the most solid part. They are worthy of gifts, so people should support them. It will bring good karma. And my favorite, they are an incomparable field of merit for the world, meaning their existence is actually affecting the world, their goodness and enlightenment reaching far beyond their physical location. This is why at the end of many Buddhist events, retreats, or talks, we dedicate the merit, hoping that our effort to become enlightened has far-reaching consequences beyond ourselves. It's also why we hear of hermit monks who spend years meditating on compassion for all beings. They believe that their mental cultivation is actually bringing benefit to the world. Take that however you like, believe it or don't. Finally, the Buddha begins a kind of countdown describing the various stages of enlightenment the attendees have attained, starting with the fully enlightened arhats, the fourth stage of enlightenment, according to the early Buddhist teachings, then stepping down through the other three stages. After that illustrious group, the Buddha starts to talk about the various elements of the path that those who haven't attained these stages are working with. These include the four foundations of mindfulness, the four kinds of right striving, four bases for spiritual power, the five faculties, the five powers, the seven enlightenment factors, the Noble Eightfold Path. Next, we learn that some monks are developing the Brahma Viharas, loving kindness, compassion, altruistic joy, and equanimity. The meditation on foulness, learning to let go of sense desire by reflecting on how unsatisfactory sense pleasure ultimately is, and the perception of impermanence. The last line before the section introducing the 16 steps says, some monks abide devoted to the development of mindfulness of breathing. I find it intriguing that mindfulness of breathing comes last. We know from the opening of the sutta that the Buddha is planning to push the monks forward in their practice in hopes they will all become enlightened this month. And the method he plans to teach to accomplish that end is mindful breathing. And yet this can be read as if it were the lowest or least important practice. He places it last, and it seems to be following a descending order, starting with fully enlightened ones. So is mindfulness of breathing the least worthy of these practices? If so, why is he offering it in this context? Ajahn Pasno straightened me out on this question. First, he pointed out that the list from the four foundations to the Noble Eightfold Path encompassed what is known as the wings to awakening, 37 elements of the Buddha that the Buddha called the heart of his teachings, according to Thanissaro Bhikkhu in his book of the same name. This observation from Ajahn Pasno points us to one of the challenges of studying the suttas. Oftentimes, as in this case, there is a kind of code you need to know in order to understand what's really going on. Further, Ajahn Pasno suggests that rather than presenting some kind of diminishing order of practices, the Buddha is using a kind of dramatic rhetorical device to build up to a climactic moment. If the Anapanasati Sutta were a TV show, this would be the cliffhanging end of the episode, cut to commercial. Next week, the 16 steps of the Anapanasati Sutta. And that is the end of my opening, the setting. So I'm sorry if that was really long and boring. So hopefully not boring, but it may be a little bit more than I usually read in one chunk. So yeah, so that's the beginning. And then I go into, then we start into the sutta, which got another 200 pages to go. So should keep us busy if we keep on this. So any thoughts or comments or questions? Thanks, Julie. Catherine T, hello.
I just want to say thank you so much for sharing your new work with us. It's an honor. And yeah, so thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you. That's nice. Can't wait for the book, because there might not be a book. I've gone back and forth between destroying the whole manuscript, giving it away, publishing it anonymously. No, thanks. But yeah, it's actually the hardest thing I've ever taken on, because usually when I'm writing, I have a lot of confidence about what I'm saying. And there's parts of this that I go into that are, yeah, not only am I not confident about what I'm saying, I'm not confident that it's all useful. And so I do have the agreement of Ajahn Pasno and Ajahn Amaro that they will review it when I have a draft finished, and I'm just about at that point. And I'm going to kind of take their, I'm going to show it to them and a couple of lay people, and then decide from there whether whether I want to go forward with it. I mean, it probably will, knowing me, I mean, I already mentioned it to the editor at Shambhala, and he was excited about it, but, he just wants to make money off me. Those greedy editors. Can't trust them. Okay, we might have to delete some of this recording today. Any other thoughts, questions, comments? Aha,
Yeah, here we go.
Victoria.
Oh, yeah. So I love that you're talking about people who think that they're doing it wrong. I mean, I think that there are so many people, so many beginning meditators in program, right, who are trying to do it and who think I can't do this because can't follow my breath.
Yeah.
That's impossible. My mind is wandering. Oh, I'm doing it wrong. And so, I think it's a generous gesture. We need it.
Well, that's, similar. I think you probably heard me say that I visited Ajahn Amaro last year at his monastery in England. And when we sat down to talk after he gave me a nice tour, I told him about this project, and I sort of expressed my concerns, saying, I'm not sure I know enough, and it's, I'm really kind of I'm revealing this struggle, my own struggle with practice, and I just don't know how helpful that is. And he said that's why people like what you do, because you do show the honest challenges of practice, rather than sort of painting it all as some glorious march to enlightenment. So yeah, I sacrifice myself on the altar of Dharma. It's Good Friday, so I get to throw out something like that. See that? My daughter texted me today, Good Friday. Why is it called that? I'm proud of myself for having brought her up, kept her completely ignorant of Christianity. She knows more about Judaism because she went to a Jewish preschool. But yeah, it's just good because Jesus died for our sins. I think that's why it's good. I don't know. Steve, hey.
Yeah, good stuff. Much like what you were doing during the guided meditation, something that you were teaching on the Wednesday class, the Four Noble Truths, really struck me. And I tried to share that verbatim, where you were talking about concentration, about how challenging it is to stopgap the cravings. And that was probably one of the hardest things that we do as addicts, that we have to be challenged by. Once we get into the craving, it's almost too late.
Yeah.
And you talked a lot about that. And much like what you were saying during the guided meditation and what you're talking about right now, I shared that in my 9 o'clock FA meeting this morning, because I was talking about meditation. We do these little 10-minute quiet times now in the FA meeting. And I was struck by how many people sent me messages in the chat, what did you mean by that? And I was getting outreach calls from people. Can you please explain that more? I'm really having a hard time meditating. And I was challenged by trying to explain to them that how to get concentrated on, dealing with these cravings. And I mean, it's been very beneficial for me. So yeah, I'm really liking this a lot.
Yeah, I just was preparing, looking at my notes for the next session of that class, because that's going to be about craving. And I actually had fun with that today, if we can call that fun, but meditation teacher fun. Because I as I did with the loving kindness course, living kindness course, I've been I'm putting together a letter, an email each week to send out to people, because I think that helps people to stay in touch with it. And I actually wrote this list. So this is about the problem of craving. And I said the underlying factors are often hidden for craving. And then here's a list of underlying potential factors for craving: our own pain, sadness, grief, and trauma, our feelings of inadequacy, depression and anxiety. We use substances to help our mood, to suppress pain, to enhance the tedium of life. And sometimes, out of nihilistic and cynical despair, feeling that life isn't worth engaging on its own terms. And then I have a list to overcome craving. I'm not just a negative person. We must first open deeply to the pain itself, then gain clarity about its source. We need acceptance paired with determination to overcome and survive. Excuse me. We need willingness to change, not just behavior, which we must, but the belief systems that sustain that behavior. We need persistence to maintain our recovery. We need to draw from the range of supports and healing tools, including meditation and spiritual practice, teachers, mentors, wise friends, community, healthy habits around diet, exercise, sleep, and creative outlets that foster joy and self-appreciation. So there you are. I've been thinking about craving. And
yeah, that's great stuff, because like I said, I mean, I don't go to bed at night, thinking that I'm going to have dreams about food, it just happens.
yeah.
And, we were talking about this, how these things just kind of happen. I'm not walking around during the day thinking about what I want to eat 3 days from now, but I've got to develop that concentration and during my meditation, during everything that you just brought up.
Yeah. I don't walk around thinking I'm going to dream about rock and roll stars, but I was hanging out with Mick Jagger in my dreams a couple nights ago. So it just, we don't really, that was a weird one too. So I know telling people your dreams is really stupid, but this was kind of interesting, because apparently at one point the Rolling Stones and the Beach Boys collaborated and made like a band together. And he was talking about that. I was like, yeah, that was really cool when you were with the Beach Boys, the Rolling Stones and the Beach Boys. What are you, freaking crazy? That is really an absurd dream. So it's almost 8, but if anybody else wanted to comment, any Beach Boys fans or, Rolling Stones fans wanted to complain about their collaboration.
You're just lucky you weren't sitting under those trees that fell at the Masters.
Oh my God, what the hell is going on? And, I played golf yesterday on a golf course where there was one fairway that was just huge eucalyptus trees just blocking half the golf course. I mean, it's like the trees of Earth are going, we're tired of this shit. We're laying down. We're taking a break. We've been standing up too long. We're going to do lying down meditation instead of standing meditation. So terrible, though, isn't it? Just horrifying. Just, you think of trees as being so solid, and that book, The Hidden Life of Trees is just fantastic. But whenever you read about this sort of the research on how trees connect with each other, you start to realize like they're living beings, and they're like families. They're growing together and they're supporting each other. Like that like when a couple of them fall down, like the other ones are like grieving in some way.
It's like the world of the fungi, that whole movie thing.
Yeah. Well, fungi is what they say, like, lets the trees really communicate, right?
Lucky nobody got killed.
Really lucky. I mean, that was could have just, somebody could have, like, they had one too many mint juleps. Hey, what do you mean a tree is falling? I don't know if they serve mint juleps at the Masters, but they should. Yeah. Well, now that what's that line about You wasted another good. Oh, that was from the car guys, remember? Now you've wasted another hour. Anyway, I hope we haven't wasted this. That's not nice. Nobody's wasted anything.
Not wasted. It was good stuff.
No, it's great to hang out with you guys, and I appreciate you guys cheering me up. It's too much time on the couch.
Click and clack and Kevin.
Good, John.
Click and clack and Kevin.
Click and clack. There you go. Thank you. I thought you said you were laughing, but I'm half deaf, so what do I know? Yes. All right, then. We'll be back on. I'll be back on Tuesday morning in the traditional time, assuming that no trees fall on me between now and then. And radiating kindness over the entire world. So,
Thank you, Kevin.
blessings.